Ladies and gentlemen, this is the beginning of your democracy lecture. As you can see, we've got some basic directions listed below. Now, I know they're written there, but I'm going to read them aloud to you just to make sure that you're clear on what they say. So first, in preparation for your lecture notes that you're going to create from this lecture, you're going to take out a few sheets of lined paper and make sure that you don't rip the holes, because these are going to go back into the note section of your binder. Pause this presentation while you take out a few sheets of lined paper. Throughout this presentation, there's different segments and slides of information. Looking at 2 and 3 of the directions, you're going to be writing down information. First, you're definitely going to be writing down all of the information that's presented to you in each slide. Now, in some of the slides, there might be some background pictures like the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. Obviously, I don't want you to write that down word for word. Okay? I'm talking about the typed information, the information that I emphasize as I talk about democracy. If there's something that I haven't presented in this lecture as like a typed piece of information, I may say that I want you to write it down in your notes. If that happens, do as I say, write it down. Last but not least, after each segment of information, using your highlighter, you're going to make a bold line across your page, and this will help separate the information as we go through this brief lecture on democracy. If you have any questions and you're in school right now, you could go see Mr. Tincher and ask for clarification. If not, you could try phoning a friend, or your best default action is going to be use your gut. Go with your instincts. Without further ado, let's begin. Democracy. Basic question you should probably be asking yourself right now: what is democracy? In this presentation, hopefully by the end of it, you'll have a general understanding of what democracy is. You'll know the difference between direct democracy and representative democracy. And you'll be able to identify the 4 core principles of American democracy that were outlined in the Declaration of Independence, which launched the world essentially that you know today in terms of the United States. Last but not least, I'll hit on some benefits of democracy. Though many might say it's a type of government that is the most inefficient, it has a lot of benefits when compared to other types of government. Looking at this little image here, beyond me, my beautiful face, you see the title democracy. And you see images of people raising their hand. Think about yourself in the classroom. What is happening when you raise your hand? You're participating. You're raising your hand to share an idea, answer a question. Keep that in mind as we go through this presentation on democracy. Democracy is a complex form of government, but it's a form of government that you're going to be very familiar with once we start talking about the basics of it. And the reason is because you've been raised in a democratic society. The values your parents instilled in you, the ideas and ideologies that schools promoted, all had a democratic lean to them. Now, democracy can be messy at times, which, looking at this slide, it appears there's a mess. But in its most basic form, democracy is simply a form of government. Now, as I've already stated, there are many forms of government out there, and democracy is just another type that has evolved over the years as people have worked with it. The definition of democracy is basically rule by the people. It's a form of government in which the people are the supreme power. They have all the control, and they exercise their control and their influence on the government by voting. And they vote on things like laws and regulations, acts, legislation, and especially the election of representatives in the case of the United States. Now, there are 2 forms of democracy. And these 2 forms of democracy are similar, but at the same time quite different. You have representative democracy, which is the type that we have in the United States, and you also have direct democracy, which is not as popular because it's harder to function by reaching all of the people, but one that was tried in history. Regardless of the differences of direct and representative democracies, in general, as stated in the definition, it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This was presented and became a characteristic and a way to define democracy by a man named Abraham Lincoln, famous president, very influential, in a speech he gave during the American Civil War, known as the Gettysburg Address. And in that speech, he wanted to remind the American public, the North and the South, as to what was at stake in the Civil War. And that was the ideals outlined in the Declaration of Independence, those core principles of democracy that we're going to get to in a moment. As I just stated, there's two types of democracy. There's direct democracy and there's representative democracy. In the United States, we have a representative type of democracy, known as a republic. Take a look at the two definitions down at the bottom of the page. They're going to help us understand the difference between direct democracy and representative democracy. One definition fits best with direct, and the other with representative. Which do you think goes with direct? Which definition do you believe goes with representative? Direct means without interruption, going straight to the source. There's no middleman. In a direct democracy, every single citizen actively plays a role in the government. They have to know all about current events, they have to know all about the laws and legislation that are being proposed, and they have to vote on every single bill and law that is proposed. For representative, the best definition is standing for and acting for another or others. In a representative democracy, or a republic, individuals are elected by the citizens to do the governing, to be aware of all the current events related to new laws and legislation that are being proposed. Because for the average citizen, it's very hard to keep up with current events and all of the new laws and legislation when you're trying to make a living on your own with your own job and your own family. Take a look at this table right down here. It does a really good job at presenting some basic differences between direct democracy and a republic, also known as a representative democracy. As you can see, direct democracies and republics, as I've stated before, are very similar. All right? The people have the power to rule. However, in one type of democracy, the direct democracy, every single citizen votes on every issue, every law, every piece of legislation. And prior to voting, all of the ideas and all of the concerns and the pros and the cons all have to be worked out in a debate at an assembly of all these citizens. An assembly is where people come together to discuss and move forward on an issue. In a republic, the citizens, as I stated before, elect politicians, people to go and represent them and govern professionally. All right? Those people that we elect as representatives come together in assemblies to debate the current events and all of the concerns, the pros and the cons of legislation that's being proposed. And then they vote on it. Now, if we elected them to office, hopefully they share our values and ideals and therefore will vote how we would vote as citizens. But the biggest difference between the two, a direct democracy and a representative democracy known as a republic, is that in a direct democracy, every citizen has to participate. Every citizen has to vote on every single thing. In a republic, the citizens elect representatives to do the debating, to do the arguing, the working out of kinks and compromise, and then voting on those laws. For this, what I want you to do is make sure you copy in this chart. It's a simple T-chart. All you need to do is make what you have on your line paper look exactly like this. It may not be as neat, but you got to be neat. But everything should be organized the same way. Democracy as a form of government is complex, and sometimes it can be inefficient. But there are definite benefits you enjoy as a citizen of a representative democracy. For example, there's limits on government power. So no one person or one group can seize power and create abusive laws that would harm us. Government leaders that we elect have to abide by the same laws as everyone else in the nation. There's less internal violence and conflict, which equals more stability. There's greater sharing of information. Knowledge is power. The more you know, the more successful you're going to be. And there's more freedoms and rights. That usually means happier citizens. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, democracy sounds good, but how did the Founding Fathers decide on that type of government? Well, it goes back to the Declaration of Independence. In the opening, in the second paragraph, the ideas and the principles that were presented by Thomas Jefferson and the other members of the Declaration Committee pointed towards a government for the people, by the people, of the people. And it's these principles that are in the second paragraph that guided those members creating the Constitution of the United States to settle on a democratic form of government. There's 4 principles in that second paragraph of the opening. First is the fact or the principle that all men are created equal. And these men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And those rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The third principle deals with those rights. And it's that to secure these rights, governments are created among men. And they get their power from the governed. So from the permission of those people that created the government. And finally, the fourth principle outlined in the Declaration of Independence is that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those unalienable rights, then the people have the right to get rid of it, to change it, and create a new government. Now, in this form, in the Declaration of Independence, it's a bit complex. So we're going to end with these 4 principles written slightly different. In easier terms, these are the 4 core principles of American democracy. First, all men are created equal. Second, citizens have certain rights that can't be taken away, and these are life, liberty, and the ability to pursue happiness. The third principle is that governments are created by the citizens that the governments are in charge of. And it's the citizens that give these governments their power. Finally, the fourth principle is that if a government abuses its power, because it was created by the citizens have the right to change it or get rid of it and create a new government. With that, you have the roots of democracy that grew in the United States through the creation of a Constitution that has guided our nation for more than 200 years and led us to become a world superpower.